Our top story this morning is Taliban cements its grip over Afghanistan after the historic withdrawal of the US troops following 20 years of war. Top US officials haven't ruled out the possibility of coordinating with the Taliban to get hold of ISIS-K.
To include the possibility of any kind of coordination in counters.
It's possible.
However, US continues to describe the Taliban as a ruthless group and has said that it is unclear whether they would change.
We don't know what the future of the Taliban is, but I can tell you from personal experience that this is a ruthless group from the past, and whether or not they change remains to be seen. And as far as our dealings with them at that airfield or in the past year or so, in war, you do what you must in order to reduce risk to mission and force, not what you necessarily want to do.
U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin praised the American troops in Afghanistan and the massive evacuation mission. He went on to say that the United States would not like to make any predictions on the future cooperation with the Taliban, but will still remain focused on ISIS-K.
The U.S. war in Afghanistan. America's going forward, Bob, I would not want to make any predictions. I would tell you that we're going to do everything that we can to make sure we remain focused on ISIS-K, understand that network, and at the time of our choosing in the future, hold them accountable for what they've done.
Now, this was their first public remark after the troop pullout. Remember, American officials have assessed that the Taliban and ISIS-K are at least rivals in Afghanistan, if not sworn enemies. US President Joe Biden had promised to hunt down ISIS-K fighters in retaliation for last week's suicide bombing at the Kabul airport gates. Top military officers have said that the Taliban's decision to liberate all detainees from the prisons the United States established has led to 2,000 ISIS-K fighters returning to the battlefield now. Apart from coordination on ISIS-K, US is working with the Taliban on a very narrow set of issues. Coordination with the Taliban in terms of getting the remaining evacuees to the airport is underway. The United States has estimated that there are close to 100 to 200 Americans wanting to leave Afghanistan. Victoria Nuland, U.S. Under-Secretary of State, has said that the United States is looking at all the possible options and routes to continue helping Americans and legal permanent residents leave Afghanistan.
These efforts did not end on August 31st, and they will not end until we have secured the evacuation of any American citizens and LPRs and folks who worked with us and served the American people who want to get out. So we've been in contact with them in the last 24 hours to tell them that we are looking at all possible options, air routes, land routes, to continue to find ways for them to help evacuate and to support them in that. We're trying to ascertain who precisely still wants to leave, who their dependent family members are, what routes may or may not feel comfortable to them. We're also working intensively, as you know, with countries on the ground who are trying to get the civilian airport open.
And for more on this, our correspondent Ira Spitzer sent us this report. Let's listen in.
The complications continue for President Joe Biden and other American officials with exactly what happens now and how Biden's performance and legacy will perhaps be affected by the chaotic nature of the pullout from Afghanistan. Now, we heard for the first time from two American military officials, generals, members of Biden's cabinet, the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, as well as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. And Mark Milley especially suggesting that the U.S. could perhaps continue some form of cooperation with the militant group, the Taliban, who now runs Afghanistan, especially with regard to counterterrorism operations. Both of the Taliban and the U.S. are enemies of the terror group ISIS-K, for instance, who was behind that terror attack that killed 13 U.S. military personnel last week. So, but at the same time, calling the Taliban ruthless. And of course, these two sides have been at war for the past 20 years. Biden himself under attack from really across the political spectrum about the way that the evacuations, and especially the evacuations of Afghan allies who worked with U.S. forces over the years, the way that that was handled. It's emerged now that the vast majority of those allies who worked with the U.S. Have not been able to be evacuated. Supposedly, the Taliban will allow many of those people to leave the country, but there are certainly grave doubts about whether that will actually happen. So Biden, who'd already been criticized pretty strongly by his Republican opponents, now faces criticism from several refugee rights organizations who say that he has essentially abandoned, the U.S. has abandoned many of the people who worked with them to this uncertain fate. So that is certainly something that the administration is trying to assure the public that that there is a future for those Afghan allies here, trying to assure those allies here. But given the chaotic nature of the situation in Afghanistan, it's one of those things where I think a lot of people would have to see it first before believing that the Taliban will actually let those people leave the country.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.